Have you ever witnessed something so petty and outrageous that you can't decide whether to laugh or scream? That's exactly what ran through my head as I tightened the final bolt on a 6-foot-tall wooden fence, one that now neatly split the lakefront in two, slicing through grass, dock, and water like it was drawn by a legal scalpel. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more powerful content like this. Behind me, a dozen stunned neighbors stood speechless, watching this audacious structure materialize right down the middle of what used to be shared paradise. Across the fence, Diane, cousin to our infamous HOA president Susan, stood frozen, her jaw slack, as her luxury lounge chairs and half-finished jet ski ramp were now permanently marooned behind a wall of lumber. What led to this surreal standoff started 5 years ago when I purchased my dream home in Willowbrook Estates, drawn in by the promise of deeded lakefront access. The property came with shared usage rights to a sandy beach and a community dock, both of which were central to my family's summers. Every weekend, my kids and I would fish, swim, and play by the water until sundown. That lakefront was more than just a view, it was a part of our life. Then came Susan Fitzgerald 6 months ago. She ascended to the HOA presidency and quickly transformed into the dictator of our little paradise. She wielded her newfound authority like a battle axe, implementing fines for trivial things like grass height, banning wind chimes under the guise of noise control, and requiring written permission to plant any flower not pre-approved by her committee. But the real rot set in with her web of favoritism. Her brother-in-law somehow became the neighborhood's official landscape inspector, paid, of course. Her childhood friend secured the pool cleaning contract, and when her cousin Diane flew in for an extended stay, it seemed the HOA rules no longer applied. I first noticed something was off when Diane began setting up an entire backyard resort on the shared lakefront. Not just a chair and a cooler, no. She rolled out heavy-duty loungers, tiki torches, a booming speaker system, and started building a private jet ski ramp. The whole setup completely obstructed the lake view and blocked access for anyone else. I spent the following week buried in paperwork. As a contracts lawyer, this was my home turf. I reviewed my home purchase agreement, the property survey, the HOA charter, and decades of meeting records. What I found was ironclad. Not only was the lakefront deeded specifically to my lot, but the HOA charter explicitly stated it had no jurisdiction over deeded rights. Any interference would open them up to personal liability. I drafted a notice and sent it certified to both Susan and Diane. They had 72 hours to clear their junk from the shared space or face legal action. Unsurprisingly, they didn't take it seriously. The next morning, Susan arrived at my doorstep in full theatrical mode, Diane in tow, along with a man she introduced as their lawyer. He looked like he'd studied law by binge-watching legal dramas. They tried it all: threats, bribes, bizarre legal theories. Susan offered to waive my HOA fees for a year if I just let it go. Diane proposed a shared schedule. She'd take Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. The so-called lawyer mumbled something about squatters' rights, which earned him an eye roll and a polite invitation to leave. The 72 hours ticked by without change. Diane, if anything, dug in deeper, expanding her setup, beginning construction on a permanent shade pavilion. So I launched Phase 2. I hired a licensed surveyor who marked the exact boundaries of the shared lakefront. As I suspected, the area was evenly split down the middle, and Diane's party zone sprawled well across both halves. Armed with the survey, I visited the local hardware store and ordered enough fencing to make a serious statement. The clerk's eyes widened as I explained where it was going. Word spread fast. By the time I got home, the whole neighborhood was buzzing. When people asked if it was true that I was building a fence, I calmly replied, "Just marking property lines." At sunrise the next day, I was at the lake with a full fence crew. We had permits, the survey, and a mission. The fence extended in a perfect line from one end of the beach to the other, even slicing the community dock clean in half. It was both practical and poetic. The emergency HOA meeting that night was jam-packed. Susan had circulated flyers declaring me a neighborhood menace, but instead of rallying support, it backfired. Other homeowners had been quietly doing their own research. A retired judge named Mark Davison stood up first and calmly laid out the legal violations committed by the board. Another neighbor, whose flower garden had been bulldozed by one of Susan's projects, followed with her findings. One by one, neighbors joined in, exposing Susan's corruption. Then Diane's husband showed up. He took one look at the fence, his furious wife, the legal circus, and made a quick decision. They were leaving. As he supervised the dismantling of Diane's setup, neighbors overheard him muttering about how Susan had dragged them into an expensive mess. Susan's final gambit came when she tried to declare an executive order to have the fence torn down. But the board's attorney finally broke his silence. He stated flatly that Susan had overstepped her authority, exposed the HOA to legal action, and needed to be removed. The vote was immediate and unanimous. Susan was out. But that wasn't the end. The board voted to press charges. Susan had funneled HOA funds toward Diane's bogus easement paperwork and had been skimming from the landscaping budget to pad her brother-in-law's paychecks. 3 months later, Susan stood before a judge charged with fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. The verdict: guilty. She was sentenced to 2 years probation, 300 hours of community service, and restitution of $47,000 to the HOA. As the judge's gavel fell, Susan crumpled in tears, and as